Hey, hello, Martin. Thank you for joining me today. It's really wonderful to see you.
Great to see you, Eric, and thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. How are you doing? How have you been?
Good. Obviously, the Booker longlisting announcement last week was like a huge surprise and led to, I guess, quite unusual levels of interest in what I'm doing. So that was overwhelming for a couple of days in the best possible way. But things quickly returned to normal as well.
Right, yeah. It was so fantastic to see, and big congratulations on that.
Thanks.
I was very excited to see it. Yeah, how do you feel about the listing in general?
I just feel incredibly lucky. I'm really happy about it. So grateful that I've been read and yeah, that I was lucky enough to be listed. Yeah, I'm not really thinking any further ahead, obviously, and trying not to think about it at all, really, and just to get on with my next book.
Yeah, it's probably the sanest approach to
Mm.
handle something like this. Now, I'm so eager to speak with you because In Ascension is one of the most original and thought-provoking and awe-inspiring books that I've read for some time. And for those who haven't read it, so it's at once a personal journey about a woman named Leigh who survives a difficult childhood and becomes a specialist in marine biology. And she joins in an exploration into deep sea trenches, and for professional and personal reasons, she investigates the origins of life, which also lead to explorations to the far reaches of outer space. And it's a story with many mysteries. And though it offers a thrilling plot and some answers, I feel like it also instills a sense of contemplation and wonder about life and the natural world in general. So this, in many ways, is quite an epic book. So I'd like to ask you that basic question to start off with: of what was your initial inspiration for the story, and how long did it take you to write it?
So I guess to go back in time a little bit first, I found my second book really difficult to write, and it was overdue. It took me a long time to write, and it wasn't the most fluent process. After I finished that, and especially after I published it, I felt a tremendous sense of relief, and that now, more than at any other time in my life, was the time to write the book that I always wanted to write. I felt I had the freedom to do that, and maybe the experience now, after several years of spending a long time each week writing, to really take on the book I always wanted to write. So, In Ascension or something like it had been bubbling around in my imagination for, let's see, probably about 12, 15 years.
Hmm.
Um, I could talk more about that, but about where the first inspiration came from, but that might lead to some spoilers regarding the end of the novel, so I'll be careful about that.
Hmm.
But I was always interested in writing, use the word you used, an epic, but also, so maybe the most epic book I might write in my life, but also a book which is about intimacy and close connections. So really immense distances and journeys, and family and friends and human consciousness and connections, or the struggle to find connections. So really looking at scale, something which is really like minute and proximate, but also something which is vast. So those two things sort of gave me a feeling at the start of the kind of book I wanted to write. I also knew I wanted to write a book which is kind of about return. And so from the start, I'm very interested in natural history and the migratory patterns of certain seabirds and sea turtles returning to the specific point on the earth that they were born
Hmm.
to then give birth themselves. Um, that kind of rhythm was there in my head. So these were the initial ideas I had. It really all came together, I think, when I really sort of homed in on my protagonist, Leigh, and I got a sense of where she was from, what her family dynamic was like. So, yeah, it came from both this idea of immense journeys, intimate proximity, and Leigh is a kind of receptacle for wonder. That was the kind of beginning of it, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, and that really comes across in
Mm.
the story. And I was wondering, do you embrace the novel being labeled as science fiction, or do you prefer it not to be, classified in any particular genre?
Um, I don't think I'm going to have any issues with how people might want to classify it. And me personally, I'm quite happy for it to be described as science fiction. I think any book that has a spaceship in it, you kind of come on, it's
Yeah.
it's science fiction. But also, I personally have quite a broad and expansive idea of what science fiction is and can be. So, for instance, the writer that you're displaying on your T-shirt just now, I would argue and have argued in print that part of Wolf's work, not just Orlando, but maybe aspects of To the Lighthouse and The Waves and Between the Acts have elements of science fiction.
Hmm.
And the imaginative reach, the interest in the sort of non-human world, like Wolf was fascinated by astronomy. And so, yeah, my idea of science fiction is something quite liberating for me, and I'm quite happy to embrace that. At the same time, I'm aware that maybe some science fiction readers, this isn't what they would consider science fiction, and that they might have some trouble with me being given that classification or using it myself. But I think science fiction's a broad church.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I agree with that about that wolf could be kind of
Mm.
categorized in that way. So I have a friend who wrote a paper about the relationship between Wolf's fiction and like subatomic particles, and
Wow.
because
Wow.
at that time in the world, there was growing scientific research about that, which Wolf was aware of and interested in, and so was aware
Mm.
of these different levels of um, areas and spheres of the world, and handling that within her fiction. Yeah, it's really
That seems
interesting.
amazing. Yeah.
There's a very striking and what I find very personally haunting moment early on in the novel when Leigh swims out into a body of water,
Yeah.
aware that if she drowned, she'd never have to return to the hellish conditions of her home life. But instead, she discovers something else in the water. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the significance of this scene, because it feels like a very important moment in the novel.
Yeah, I think it's really the moment where the course for the rest of her life was began. So yeah, it's a moment of despair. Leigh, I think at this stage is around 9 or 10 years old. She's suffering some abuse from her father, and yeah, feels suffocated. Can't really see a way out for her in life. Can't really see a future for herself. One of the few consolations she has is swimming, which she loves. She wild swims on her own near to the family home, and so this particular swim that you allude to, it's quite a tempestuous day. Uh, the water's rough. She goes in and has a real sense of doom, but something takes her by surprise. Something really does take her, and she becomes aware, I think, of her absolute insignificance in quite an exhilarating way. And I think senses the possibility for brilliant kind of freedom in her life. So, without wanting to quote any of the lines exactly, I think she talks about the realization that there is no absence around her in the water or in the air. There is only other life. And she finds that exhilarating. So she comes out of the water nervously affected by that, really excited, and I think immediately begins to pursue that fascination. And that moment never really leaves her. There's I mean, maybe at the risk of like moving on, but also returning to this question a little. There's something as a phenomenon which astronauts often refer to, the overview effect. Maybe the first moment when they can see the whole Earth from space, and they
Mm.
can see the what appears as silly, arbitrary divisions that we impose between countries or even between species. And I mean, I guess ideally this moment changes them and the way they behave when they return to Earth. This moment or something like it happens to Leigh when she's 9 years old and she swims. And yeah, the moment always stays with her. And it kind of haunts her in a way as well. So all of her interest in microbiology, in what composes life, what composes cells, it's not only strict academic remote interest. It's something which has given her life. So there's almost selfishness in her fascination with the natural world. It's kind of allowed her to live. It sustained her, and that kind of guilt about that, but also and embracing of that is always with her.
Feels like such a transformative and moving moment. And I love how, like you say, you present this profound sense of being connected to nature, and which comes from this sense of smallness and anonymity, but also being at the same time sort of central to the world, because she is the individual who is perceiving it all. And I
Yes.
can think of a couple of occasions, like in my own life, where I've
Mm.
had sort of experiences similar
Mm.
to this. So I was wondering, is there a moment or multiple instances in your own life when you were in nature and felt a kind of significant shift in perspective, like Leigh experiences?
Um, Possibly, and not necessarily in the water. For me, maybe in large forests in my 20s. And that made me, I think, that sort of shifted my imagination of time and space, I think, and our place in it, as a sense of like sort of the majesty of the non-human, the just the unimaginable like reaches of time that precede us. Um, and I don't know, something about spending a lot of time in large forests and rainforests in my 20s made me consider all that in a positive way, not in some, oh, doesn't this diminish us? We're only here so briefly. Da, da, da. This really had the opposite effect because the fact that we all exist, like it's the most basic thing, the childish thing. The fact that we exist is so worthy of celebration. And seeing ourselves in the context of kind of natural history really helped me access that wonder. So I guess I'm not really answering the question head on, Eric, but several episodes I think in my 20s in forest. I also did take a big sea journey in my 20s,
Hmm.
and I took a ship that had come from Antarctica. I didn't go to Antarctica, but it picked me up on Ascension Island, and I traveled across the equator for 7 days. The small ship with maybe 40 people and really interesting people. I had lots of important conversations, and I remember stopping at the equator and swimming there, where the sea floor was several kilometers beneath us, and that was completely exhilarating.
Hmm.
So that's another moment where, yeah, I was trying to sort of felt a shift in my perspective. Yeah,
And there are many mysteries in
yeah,
this story, and some are to do with the plot, and others are to do with these grander questions. So first, I'd like to discuss the characters, because Leigh and her sister Helena have very different points of view and versions of events
yeah.
surrounding their childhood and their father. And I do want to avoid giving any spoilers, but I'm curious, did you have definitive answers regarding these characters' lives before writing about them, or did you invent their stories as you went along?
Very much the latter. So as much as I try to plan what I do in my work, I find I need a sort of self-sustaining energy that is generated by new discoveries as I write. I always knew I wanted to access different consciousness and slightly different perspective at some point later in the novel. I hope that's not giving too much away. Um, but it was only really as I was writing that other perspective and consciousness that I began to challenge what I'd already written from Leigh. Do I have a concrete idea of exactly what happened? No, I see it somewhere between the two perspectives. But that was something I negotiated as I wrote. And that kind of experience is a large part of the pleasure I take from writing. If I were able to set it all out in advance, it might be a smoother writing process. But I don't think the books would have the sense of strangeness and certain kind of energy that they do have. Very necessary for me to kind of access that thrust in order to complete the books, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there are also larger mysteries, such
Mm,
as the origins of life and the nature of time and
mm,
reality, and memory. Speaking about those characters, and of
yeah,
course, there are no definitive answers for these
yeah.
larger questions, but you offer a compelling point of view about them in the story. So I was wondering, what sort of research did you conduct concerning some of the more scientific aspects of the novel, and can you speak a bit about how much this factored into your writing of the story, versus your own imaginative input and things that were
Mm.
entirely created by you?
It's a difficult balance, and I'm always at pains to point out that I'm an amateur when it comes to scientific writing. I don't have an academic background in that. I'm an enthusiast, and the research that I take for any novel is really comes in two forms. Firstly, it just comes from the stuff that I love to read anyway. So people like Ed Yong, Nick Lane, Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy, Edward O. Wilson. These are people that I'm reading anyway, regardless of whether I'm writing a novel that's connected to any of their work. So since I think my mid-20s, I've read a lot from the natural sciences, from animal behavior, evolutionary biology, marine biology. This is stuff that I'm really interested for myself. I don't think there was a certain point in writing or thinking about writing this novel where I thought, okay, I need to get up to speed on this aspect of cellular theory. Therefore, I should order these books. It wasn't really as strict or as neat as that.
Mm.
Um, I guess I could mention some of the books I read, but I don't want to necessarily give someone a reading list. I don't think that's really
Mm.
fair on readers that they. I think someone should be able to come into this book without knowing really anything about marine microbiology. In an early draft, maybe I went too far into some of the technical detail. So my editor, who's my first reader, uh, he was really helpful with that and helped me hopefully find the right balance between kind of elucidating things but not burdening the reader with too much technical detail. So that
Mm.
was something that came through the drafting process. So yeah, one writer who was important for researching the novel was Lynn Margulis, who is the co-originator of the Gaia hypothesis with, of course, James Lovelock, but is maybe certainly in Britain anyway, less well known than Lovelock. But her work is amazing and really about symbiosis, the importance of connection between species in the history of life. So she was a big inspiration for both a sense of wonder in the novel and some of the technical stuff regarding cellular theory as well. Yeah.
You are starting to answer this already, or speak about this already, but because all three of your novels present a series of enigmas,
Mm.
and I think it's one of the most compelling things about reading your books is that as a reader, like I feel like I go on this journey and I can start to feel out answers to some of the questions that are presented and asked, but aren't there aren't necessarily definitive answers to it, and so it's kind of
Yes.
open to interpretation. So I was, and I'm not sure really how to phrase this question, but I was wondering, is it difficult to find that balance in your writing where you present mysteries with some answers or partial answers while also leaving room for ambiguity and interpretation?
I think, Eric, if I were fully aware of how I approach this process, it might stop me from being able to do it. I
Mm.
think when I'm when I start the novel, I don't know the answer. If I did, I wouldn't write it.
Mm.
I to a certain extent, I share in the how to put it the attempt by my protagonists to arrive at somewhere meaningful. That's a position that I partly take on when I'm writing it. Maybe at some point when I'm writing it, I think I will arrive at some satisfying the broadest terms, transcendent discovery, but that never feels right. The further I get on in the novel, it feels to me that coming up with a clear presentation of what the answer is feels like too cheap a representation of life. So I'm, throughout the novel, I'm trying to arrive at that while at the same time knowing it's impossible. And maybe there's a kind of cognitive dissonance that I have and also that my protagonists have. So I think Leigh tries to arrive at that while possibly knowing that she never will. knowing that she never will by no means voids the legitimacy of the attempt. I think the attempt is crucial. I guess I kind of know I'm not going to arrive at a clear answer at the end, but I have to try every time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Though your fiction is primarily about the hearts and souls of your characters, and these larger questions to do with existence, it's also highly conscious of the impact of capitalism, especially when it concerns such large-scale investigations, like into the bottom of the ocean and outer space. So these studies wouldn't be possible without massive funding, and so they kind
Yeah.
of necessarily involve profit driven concerns. So, can you speak a bit about your feelings about the interaction between scientific pursuits and corporate interests, and how this plays out in the novel?
Yeah, I mean that's a hugely important question. Yeah, you're absolutely right to point to the destructive urges and energies of capitalism in exploiting and continually mining everything that's not human. And that's something I think that's always been there in my early novels as well, although maybe slightly quieter in my early novels. So Leigh's definitely conflicted the fact that she works for an organization with essentially an imperial impulse to go out beyond the earth and again without wanting to give much away, there's elements of off-world mining in that this organization and its origins. Also, one of the reasons that Leigh is Dutch and is from Rotterdam, it's not simply that this is an area, the Netherlands, which has had to historically engineer ways to live with high water levels, which is something which is increasingly affecting many parts of the world, but also due to the kind of long imperial history of the Dutch East Indian Company. So her great grandfather worked for an imperial company, and essentially kind of Leigh does as well. So yeah, I'm absolutely alluding to the link between capitalism, imperialism, and science. So what do I think about that? I mean, I guess I'm conflicted about that as well. I want to keep finding things out about the universe. But at the same time, we shouldn't be dredging the seafloor. I mean, that's really clear cut.
Mm.
And maybe, I mean, I'm not sure that you're asking that in this question, Eric. I think you probably possibly were, but this perspective or philosophy inherent in capitalism that the earth is there to be mined for greater and greater profit levels, I think that rests on the assumption that humans are the center of the world. Everything has to be filtered through us and our own interests primarily. And I've always, right from the start, tried to write fiction which is slightly askance of that. And I'm always trying to find different ways of doing that. Whether or not I'm succeeding, I don't know, but that was right from the start in Infinite Ground.
Mm.
And tried a slightly different way of attempting that in Ascension.
Yeah, I can recall how that kind of tension was evident in Infinite Ground, and I found it really interesting and moving when I went back to reread In Ascension, and because so many of the later parts of the novel like deal with this issue, and then going back to the beginning and seeing how it ties to this kind of this imperial past, and then
Mm-hmm.
the imperial future as
Yeah.
new technology and developments occur. So Leigh is a very solitary and work-driven person by nature, and though her research has enormous consequences, it's also at the expense of her romantic relationship and her connection to her family. And there is this compelling question throughout the novel where I was wondering, is Leigh embracing life by immersing herself in her studies, or is she rejecting it by growing so distant from other people? So can you speak a bit about this tension in the novel, and how she wrestles with this issue?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, Eric, and I imagine different readers will have different feelings about that. So I don't know about other writers, but for me, a character, it never sort of speaks to me fully formed at the start. It'd be easier perhaps if they did, but for me, characters, they begin at least as an aspect of self. They come from, parts of me then, and I can be like critical of that part one of the reasons for forming this character, I can want to explore that and interrogate it. And then the more that process plays out, the more sympathetic I become, the more independent and further from me the character becomes. But yeah, like to be honest, to be like completely honest, Eric, that conflict that Leigh has is something that I have also. I am to Leigh's devotion to her work and her scientific interests. I mean, that's me with writing, and for my whole adult life, I've maybe sacrificed certain duties and personal richness, maybe at the expense. Well, no, I sort of neglected those at the expense of writing, and I can't really explain why. Like writing has been that important to me, other than that it's given me moments I would never swap for anything. And so, yeah, I guess that kind of tension that was playing out with Leigh. Obviously, I take Leigh's character and her family further than I am at this stage in my life, and I don't. She certainly feels guilty at her self-centeredness, her selfishness, and I do as well. When I'm writing, I'm maybe slightly remote from other obligations, and that's something I need to get better at and negotiate better as well. It's a really difficult balance, and I don't think Leigh will ever or would have ever arrived at a place that she was entirely happy. It's difficult though. Like at the very beginning of this conversation, we spoke about Leigh going into the water and finding this impulse to keep on living. So had she not done that, she may well have never grown into adulthood. She did. This fascination with the natural world and her pursuit of science after that have kept her alive. So she needs that. I don't think, like, to an extent, she kind of has to act the way she does, and she feels bad about that. And her sister and other people in her family certainly criticize her for that. Yeah, she could have been a better sister and daughter, certainly, but I think me anyway. I try to cut her some slack. She also had to stay alive and do what she needed to do to come close to happiness. It's a really difficult negotiation, and it's the first time I've ever really delved into character like that in fiction in my third novel. So this is all like a kind of discovery and learning curve for me as well.
Mm. Yeah, it was actually going to be my next question to you about how psychologically similar you feel to Leigh and the parallels between extended periods of solitary contemplation and
Yeah.
writer. But I think it's something that a lot of us readers of people who spend so much of our lives reading rather than just as a passive occasional hobby, that we feel the same tension that we're in one sense we're reading about characters and people and history and the world, but at the same time we're completely rejecting the world because we're just sat here all day and not actually experiencing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the same tension with readers, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask about your development as a writer and as a reader, but also first I wanted to ask, since your fiction has had such a strong connection with nature, I'm also curious, are you somebody who's always like spent a lot of time outside? Do you feel a very like strong connection with the natural environment? You spoke about this a bit before, but did you grow up in a very rural area? Did you have access to nature in the outside like that?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I did. I was lucky. So I grew up near Culloden, just outside of Inverness in the north of Scotland. And there was woodlands, like a small river. There were large parks, and yeah, it's a sort of typically nostalgic memory of childhood, like endless summers in that kind of environment. So I was very lucky. Also, my father and his side of the family are from Skye, and we would go there a lot in childhood where we had, a lot of freedom from a really young age just to walk where we wanted, and interacting with animals there. So yeah, I guess I never really thought about that very much regarding my interest in natural history later in life, but perhaps it was seeded there. Yeah.
Mm. And Skye's such a sort of strange environment in itself, in that, isn't it? Most of the time, like cloaked in kind of mist and uh, is that right? There's like a lot of fog there, and um,
I mean, I guess I haven't spent all that much time there, like in winter. Well, when I was there several weeks ago, actually, in the Kwarang Ridge, which is, I think, in terms of accessibility and spectacle, must be one of the best walks in the world. And this sky is so busy in the summer. My friends and I arrived there really early at about 6 in the morning, and yeah, you couldn't really see further than 2 meters because of the fog. It was really thick. And when the fog began to dissolve, it was just like unbelievably beautiful. I can't describe it, Eric. Like so beautiful.
and did you always did you grow up reading a lot? Did you have a lot of ready access to books and
So I guess I never really know whether to say it was a reading house or not. So my mum is a big reader, but she didn't really like recommend books to me, or I wasn't given like a curated list or when I was young. So like my first reading memories, I had those. It was like I used to get that at Christmas every year. These kind of Disney stories that would have a cassette with them, and I would sort of listen to the cassette and read along, and partly like, well, not teach enough to read, but improve my literacy. I guess very young, do that. Slightly older, 10 or so, I got into horror writing, and that was a big thing. I don't really have like a list of readers that were important to me as a child. It was really once I went to university at 17 or so that I started reading much more widely. Yeah.
and did you always feel drawn to writing even when you were younger, or is that something that also
No,
developed at university? Or
no, I definitely did. Like I remember like discrete moments very young where maybe in one of those summers near my childhood home where everything that was happening around me, from the smallest thing to the biggest thing. So the friends around me lounging around, having just spent all their energy playing football. The like humidity in the air, the kind of lambent orange of the sunset over the Murray Firth, the sense of like time passing, and also looking back in my first memories. So maybe this is happening when I'm 8 or 9 years old, and just being just so full of like contentment and excitement at all that I had access to as an experiencing thing, but also at the same time a voice saying really clearly, this moment or this experience is not complete. It's not realized until I try to do something with it through creativity. And it was always going to be writing from then. It wasn't like painting or music or something. It was always like there's something in my experience which is unfinished and incomplete, and has to drive me to I don't want to say use it because that sounds too exploitative and against what we were saying earlier, but I need to try and collaborate with the sense of like the enormity of everything around me. So that's always been with me, yeah, from a really young age. So yeah, I remember that memory really clearly.
and what are some books that have had a major influence on you? I know you said
Yeah.
not so much from your younger years, but then I guess like later teenage years, both for you generally, but also, for this novel in particular, but also maybe if you'd like to show any personal copies of books that you own, which have had a personal significance on you, like either for sentimental reasons or because they've
Yeah.
had such a strong impact on your life.
Yeah, it's great to get asked a question like that and talk about other writers. Also puts the pressure off me a little bit, which I'm always keen to do. Um, and this is going to look really cringeworthy because of the t-shirt you're wearing, and this is not like a setup, but this is I don't know how you can see it in the screen. This is a Penguin copy of To the Lighthouse, which I read when I was 18, and so I had one professor, Angela Smith at university, who really, I think, changed my life. I did a course on modernism in my second year at university when I was 18, and it sounds completely absurd that reading Woolf for me felt like coming home. You know, in terms of social standing, our periods, our places in history, our families, everything, we couldn't be more different. You know, I come from a working class background in the north of Scotland. Woolf is none of those things.
Mm.
But it felt like she was completing thoughts for me. She would even use phrases that I had been using privately, like to myself, or since childhood. Phrases like "moments of being."
Mm.
Um, Reading Woolf allowed me to access some of those memories I was describing to you in that in my answer to your earlier question. I think Woolf is always, regardless of what she's writing, she's trying to negotiate memories and the continual loss of the past, but also the possibility that the past is not necessarily lost. Um, that's always been one of my concerns, and to see Woolf treating it so beautifully and challengingly was really inspiring. So reading To the Lighthouse, especially, maybe gave me some kind of confidence that the urges I had privately regarding creativity were not entirely invalid. It took a long time to really do anything with that, but Wolf and also I guess a kind of mentor, my professor, Angela Smith,
Mm.
really set me on that way. So, I mean, especially the time passes section in the middle. I was looking through this just the other day for the first time in maybe 20, 22 years. But I was looking through my old notes and my handwriting, which hasn't changed in 22 years. But
Mm.
also like, this was Angela's copy of volume 5 of Wolf's diary and her handwriting there.
Oh.
Um, yeah, so that, I mean, I remember that as just a really fertile time for me. My undergraduate studies, like encountering Wolf, modernism in general, but Wolf specifically.
Was
I'd
To
never.
the Lighthouse the first book you read by her?
Yeah, it was. Yes. So I think that was on a sort of introductory modernism course where we looked at Joyce and people as well. I did a later course again with Angela on Woolf, and I think through that I read everything. So the diaries, the nonfiction, and also maybe I'll just this is an opportunity to mention the collection Moments of Being, and in particular the long essay Sketch of the Past, which I think is criminally underread and one of the best things Woolf ever wrote. It's about an 85-page essay um, at the beginning of what might have gone on to be an autobiography. I think it's so important for Wolf's work. I think it's brilliant. As far as I know, only published in Britain in a collection called Moments of Being. So yeah, like Jacob's Room as well was, I guess, where Wolf made a really big creative, not necessarily leap forward, but a creative shift that I find really exciting as well. And also like serendipity, like the fact that To the Lighthouse is for much of it set in Skye. Although Wolf was really writing about St. Ives, she'd never been to Skye. That seems serendipitous.
Mm.
Uh, but her diaries and her letters are brilliant. Hermione Lee's biography, which I recently reread, is astonishing as well. And yeah, reading Wolf now, bringing these books out of my bookshelf feels like coming home. It's like such a comfort and yeah, and a joy. Yeah.
Mm.
So that's, I mean, I can maybe mention like one other book if that's okay.
Yeah,
Do I
of
have time?
course.
Yeah.
It'd be
So this
great.
is something quite different. I'll show you the book. Um, so this is,
Oh, hmm. That's
yeah,
a graphic novel, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. Have you read it?
No, it's on my bookshelf just over there, but and
Oh,
I
nice.
don't know why I've never got to it yet, but yeah, definitely I should after this, obviously.
So it's a graphic novel called Here by Richard Maguire. I'll just quickly read out the sort of two-line synopsis just so that people know what it is.
Mm.
Richard Maguire's Here is the story of a corner of a room and of the events that have occurred in that space over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. So yeah, that's the idea in a nutshell. It also interacts quite nicely with To the Lighthouse,
Mm.
which follows one house, and in one section, time passes, looks at a house as it's uninhabited, as it's taken over by non-human life, etc. So the reason I wanted to mention here and why it's important to me is because of public libraries. So I mean, the libraries in Edinburgh are like completely instrumental to me. They've been a refuge since I first moved here when I was 25. My library card and my passport are my most valuable possessions. Um, so both as a place to write, so I still write there, I have done that intermittently for all of my novels. Obviously, accessing books for pleasure, for research as well, for the sense of like quiet fraternity when you're working on something and you see these other like heads bent down at their desks. So I borrowed here from the library maybe 5 years ago, and I loved it. I love this book. I mentioned it to my partner Adna. She borrowed, I think when we first started dating, and she borrowed the same copy from Edinburgh Public Library, and she loved it. And I had this idea that, well, and then I think at one stage we were reading that same physical copy from the library, like together at home. And I had the idea that it might be nice and sort of romantic to buy a copy of the book and then approach a librarian and ask if we can do an exchange. If I can if I can somehow take home the same physical copy that we had both used from the library and give them the fresh copy, so they need to sort of take off the list of due dates and the magnetic
Hmm.
strip or whatever. But it was a lovely idea in prospect. But to be honest, I chickened out. How would I go about explaining what I wanted to do and the reasons for it? I would probably give a garbled explanation, and it would look like I'd stolen a book or something. So, so we never did that. So sadly, Eric, this is not the library's copy. This is mine. This is our copy. But really, I thought it was just a way of like talking about public libraries, and given how readily uh, current UK government is dismantling public libraries, I just wanted to sort of speak about how actually instrumental they've been in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really important issue, and yeah, something I've been witnessing too of the kind of gradual deterioration of the public libraries here in London. It's been really concerning and sad to see.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's an incredibly sweet story of and like notion of wanting to get the copy that you both borrowed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very nice. But I think I probably yeah, I might have like had the same inclination, but probably like you would have felt too shy to actually try to enact it and
Yeah.
do anything about it. So as a way of kind of wrapping up and closing, I just want to ask, are you working on something new now, or are you still sort of basking on because yeah, since this did take so long to write, yeah.
Yeah, I am working on something new. So I spent quite a long time, the end of last year and the first few months of this year, researching and really thinking about what to do for the next one. I was researching it in different ways, like from the ground up. And I just started writing it maybe 6 weeks ago. So I write everything by hand, like well, pen and paper. And so this is like the beginnings.
Hmm.
And what I need to do now is, so I've written maybe 15,000 words or so, and I need to like type it all up and begin to shape it. But I'm really happy to be into something again. I'm at my happiest when I'm writing. I don't want to say too much about what this is because I think, as I was like suggesting earlier, I don't really see the full form from the start. So it will change drastically. So I don't really want to commit to what it is in case that shapes my imagination of it later. But it's something quite different again for me.
Hmm.
Um, like my other work, it's going to be partly about the interconnection between all levels of life, whether it's the protagonist and their family, or it's the pollen in the air and like sea droplets and an animal life. That's going to be there, but in lots of ways, it's a departure for me as well. So I probably shouldn't say more than that about it at this stage.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, that's really exciting and great to hear. Well, thank you so much for discussing this book with me and your writing life with me. Yeah, I can't really like articulately explain how like this reading this, I felt very impactful for me and very moving for me, and one that I've continued thinking about and keep lingering on and thinking back on scenes or certain like concepts of the book. And that always feels to me like the best kind of reading experience of a book that kind of haunts you and stays at the back of your mind and that you continuously think about. So I'm really grateful and yeah, for you for writing this wonderful book. So thank you so much.
Oh no, that's an amazingly generous response. So thank you for your level of engagement with it, Eric. Like that means the world. Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and good luck with your new writing, and
Thank you.
good luck with the whole Booker Prize circus as it as
Yes.
it carries on. It's
Okay.
yeah, been wonderful speaking with you, and great to see you again.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for thanks for helping me with this book. Like, it's really appreciated. Yeah. Yeah. You read it twice. Kirsty was telling me you read the novel
Yeah,
twice.
yeah. I just found when I got to the end, and I was just so interested by that shift later on in the book in perspective,
Mm.
and what that meant to what we were told earlier on. And so, like, both for that like plot reason,
Mm.
and wanting to go back and see if I could see more, if there were more like clues or scenes early on that could provide some insight for that, but then also just, yeah, this like larger sense. I love how you just create this sense of like wonder in the book, and I guess just wanting to stay in that sensation of with all those questions, and yeah, and so yeah, I just I just thought, like, actually I don't want to go and read something else now. I want to go back and start at the beginning of this, and
That's amazing. Yeah.
stay.
No, that sense of like awe and wonder, that's what I want to both evoke and access for myself when I'm writing it. That's the primary thing. And that's why I was talking about like trying to find like different ways to access it in my writing, different strategy maybe for my third book with
Mhm.
maybe slightly more relatable and more like accessible protagonists. But yeah, that it's what Leigh's trying to access, and it's what I'm trying to access, to be honest. And if my readers are accessing it, then it's working. That's what I want. Because I don't see that wonder or um, awe as being like indulgent or apolitical or anything like that. I think for me that's like the beginning of like empathy and curiosity and interest in the world and time responsibility, and all of those things can come from that. So I think like art has like a really important role in that way. So that's kind of what I was thinking there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really comes across. And I know my other readers have really connected with it too. And so that's why I'm probably why I'm so excited to see it on the Booker Prize list. I
Yeah,
know it'll like introduce it to like a whole range of audience that will pick it up. And some may connect with it as strongly as that, or some may not, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
just
yeah,
all part of the process of reading, and different
absolutely.
readers' receptions to books. But personally, I get so excited when I see books that I've
Mm.
personally felt so connected to, that other readers accessing that, and discussing it, and getting various points of view.
And what a gift for a writer to have this kind of exposure for the first time that I have through the book prize and through like people like you that are featuring my book. And yeah, absolutely, there's going to be people that are really not into this. That's one of the reasons I'm not on social media and I don't look at Goodreads,
Mm.
because yeah, I'm sure there'll be a lot of like haters out there. But no, I mean, like conversations with you like are like really bar me up as well. So helps keep me going as well.
But hopefully, yeah, we might see each other in person,
Yes, I'm just going
just
to say that. Yeah.
at some other point, or perhaps like in the Booker process. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that'd be really good. And yeah, to hear more about what you're reading and talk more about, we can geek out on Virginia Woolf, always wanted to do
Absolutely.
that.
I'm always happy to do that. Yeah.
Great.
Always a
Okay,
pleasure.
well, thanks again, Eric. Thanks a lot.
Have a great day, and yeah, good luck with
Cheers.
the writing, and
Thanks
yeah,
a lot.
speak to
Thank
you
you. Good
again
luck with
soon.
everything. See you later, Eric. Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.